In a small church, young Lily, clutching her grandmother's rosary, raised a simple but profound question: "Why do you wear that cross?" The room, initially quiet, became charged with expectation. Karoline Leavitt, standing before the congregation, smiled thoughtfully, knowing this question held layers of meaning. She touched the cross around her neck, a cherished gift from her mother, inscribed with the word, "Hope." Looking into Lily's earnest eyes, she understood this was more than a child's curiosity. It was an invitation to share something deeper. Leavitt began by recounting her journey, the struggles and doubts that shaped her faith. She recalled her high school volleyball days when she had lost an important game. At the time, it felt like failure, but her mother had given her this cross to remind her that losses are just stepping stones, not the end. This lesson carried her through college, where she faced skepticism and self-doubt. She questioned her beliefs, challenged by an environment that often dismissed faith as outdated or irrelevant. But despite the struggles, she always returned to the cross, finding strength in its silent reassurance. Years later, as she stepped into the high-pressure world of politics, the criticism became relentless. From her time at the White House to running for Congress, she encountered harsh scrutiny, with people questioning her values, intelligence, and purpose. Some days, she admitted, the noise was overwhelming. But every morning, she put on the cross, a symbol of resilience, a quiet but firm declaration that her faith mattered more than public opinion. The congregation listened intently as she spoke, her words resonating with the audience in different ways. Some saw their own struggles reflected in hers, doubts about their careers, their choices, their faith. Others, like an elderly man in the back, found themselves reminiscing about past days when faith was simpler, more deeply woven into everyday life. Then, a young man in the crowd stood up, hesitant at first, but then speaking with conviction. "Miss Leavitt," he said, "you talk about faith and strength, but how do you keep it in politics, where everything is chaos?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Many had wondered the same. Leavitt nodded, appreciating the honesty in his question. "Politics is brutal," she admitted. "I've had moments where I wanted to give up. Every day, there's criticism, attacks, people trying to tear you down. But my faith isn't dependent on public approval. It's rooted in truth, in knowing that I am walking a path that isn't always easy, but always meaningful. This cross reminds me of that." The young man nodded, taking in her words. He sat down, his expression contemplative, as if finding some clarity in her response. A woman holding a toddler then spoke up. Her voice was soft but carried an edge of worry. "I just had a baby," she said. "Like you, I want to pass down faith, but the world is different now. It's noisy, filled with distractions. I'm afraid my son won't understand the values I grew up with." Leavitt stepped closer, her tone gentle but resolute. "I understand that fear," she said. "I have a baby too, and every day, I wonder how I'll teach him what my parents taught me. The world is different, but the core of faith hasn't changed. I wear this cross not just for myself, but for my son, to show him, through my actions, what I believe in. One day, I hope he asks me, just like Lily did today, and I'll tell him about my mother, my faith, and why I choose to live by it." The woman nodded, holding her child a little tighter, her eyes glistening with unspoken emotion. Then, from the back of the room, an elderly man with white hair and a cane slowly stood. "I remember your parents," he said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "They were good people. They lived their faith. Seeing you today, I see them in you." His words, simple yet profound, hung in the air. Leavitt's eyes shimmered with emotion. "Thank you," she said. "Everything I learned about faith came from them. They weren't rich, they weren't famous, but they lived with kindness, honesty, and an unwavering belief in doing what's right. This cross, it's not just a piece of jewelry. It's a reminder of who they were and who I strive to be." A hush fell over the room as people absorbed her words. Some whispered to their neighbors, reflecting on their own family traditions and the values they wanted to pass down. Others sat quietly, lost in thought. Lily, watching all of this, looked up at her mother with a growing realization. Her small question had sparked something far bigger than she expected. When Leavitt turned back to her, she smiled. "Lily, your grandmother's rosary isn't just an object. It's a piece of her love, her belief. Just like my cross, it's a reminder that faith isn't something we carry alone. It's something we share. Lily nodded, gripping the rosary a little tighter. She didn't have all the answers, but she felt something she hadn't before, a sense of connection, a deeper understanding of what faith truly meant. As the church service came to an end, people didn't rush to leave. They lingered, shaking hands, sharing quiet conversations, as if reluctant to let go of the moment. The young man who had asked about politics turned to his friend. "I think I'll start praying again," he murmured. The mother with the toddler whispered, "I'll tell my child about faith, just like she said." The elderly man smiled to himself, lost in memories, but also in renewed belief. Leavitt stood in the center of the church one last time, looking at the people before her. "Faith," she said, her voice clear and steady, "isn't something we find once and hold onto perfectly. It's a journey. It's filled with doubt, struggle, and failure. But it's also filled with moments like this, when we share, when we listen, when we find each other." The applause that followed wasn't just out of politeness. It was heartfelt, genuine, a reflection of the connection that had just formed in the room. Some clapped, others wiped away tears, and a few simply stood in silence, feeling the weight of her words. As people began to leave, Lily turned to her mother. "Grandma would be proud, right?" she asked. Her mother smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "More than proud. She'd be amazed." Leavitt touched her cross one final time before stepping outside, watching as Lily and her mother walked away. She knew this wasn't just a speech, not just a moment in a church. This was something bigger, something that would continue beyond these walls, carried in the hearts of those who had been there. Faith, after all, wasn't just about belief. It was about passing it on, living it, and finding meaning in even the smallest of questions.